All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with the employee Q&A session. Y'all can take your seats. So I want to share, so the board established this session for employees to be able to ask questions of our candidates. And so they do ask that if you want to ask a question tonight, your employee, that you have your badge visible. So that way we know that you're an employee. So as everybody makes their seats, I do want to mention that over here, what you see on the screen, which is you, is being live streamed. So just be cognizant of that tonight, as you're going to be on camera the entire evening, as folks can tune in from home. So tonight, we have with us Dr. Luna-Vedder, and she just wrapped up her interview, if you're here for that, about an hour and a half of that. And she and I both suffer from something called seasonal allergies. So her poor voice, she's got a cough drop, I've got my cough drop. But we are going to get started with in just a moment, but I do want to introduce, so the way this is going to work in just a moment, I'm going to ask Dr. Luna-Vedder to share a little bit about herself, personally and professionally, for those who weren't here for the interview. And then over here, I have Elizabeth Vincent, Director of Continuous Improvement, and over here, Jessica Goldberg, Director of Communications and Marketing. And we've got some microphones. And so after Dr. Luna-Vedder introduced herself, all you have to do is raise your hand, and we'll come to you with the microphone. Do please use the microphone so those at home can hear you. Without further ado, Dr. Luna-Vedder.
Thank you. So I am Jean Luna-Vedder, and I have been in Montgomery County since 2007. Before that, I was born and raised in Iowa. My mother was a high school dropout who ran a daycare for over 40 years and taught kids to read and write, and they were ready for kindergarten, and she took great pride in that. And my dad was on the assembly line at Caterpillar Tractor Company. I had two older sisters. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And as such, I strongly believe that education is the most important trajectory in defining students and where they end up in life. Personally, I graduated in undergrad with an elementary education degree after being a pharmacy major for 3 years and deciding, much to the chagrin of my parents, that I really wanted to go into education. And from there, I had 4 children of my own. I have 3 sons. The oldest is in the Navy in San Diego, in nuclear engineer. I have a 25-year-old who is right here back with us in Clarksville, Tennessee, working up in Guthrie, Kentucky. I have a 22-year-old who will graduate tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., he tells me, from Austin Peay State University, where he has played baseball. And I have an 18-year-old at Clarksville High School who will graduate here in just a few weeks. I also do have a stepdaughter who is in elementary school. She has special needs, and she is in a CDC life skills classroom. So that is just a little bit about me. I have been a military dependent for the last 20 plus years, which has led us to opportunities in the states of Washington, North Carolina, but back here in Tennessee since 2007, where we are here to stay.
Thank you. All right, so who has the first question?
All right, I got this. All right, my name is Isaac Zilkowski. I'm a teacher at Clarksville High School. Born and raised here. I'm a 4th generation farmer. My kids are 5th generation. Dr. Luna-Vedder, before I begin with you, I would like to thank the following school board members for replying to my email about tonight. Mr. Baggett, Ms. Berry, and Ms. Pace, I truly appreciate your time. You are public servants. I'm a constituent of this district. It's very important. I'm very active in the politics in town, and I think it's a very big part of our district too. First, I'm going to start your question with a couple of quotes from the previous 2 candidates that I found in the Leaf Chronicle. Candidate 1, top priority is going around and meeting with staffs and determining from staffs the most pressing thing that's going on that I need to know about. This candidate I've seen one time in my building, since she's been in our district. Candidate 2, talking about the same thing, presence in our building. Aware of the strain and stress it puts on teachers for the director to just show up. The constant words that they used were stress, strain, and anxiety. I personally feel the district leadership should be more present in buildings. The current and previous district leadership teams have been completely absent in our buildings the past 3 years. I wish I could count on one hand the number of times the previous and current director have been cited in my building hallways, but I cannot, and that's an issue. I will assume it was due to the virus and potential exposures. Teachers were in the building, speech pathologists were in the building, principals were in the building. This is an issue. It's important to help with teacher morale and retention issues by having leadership present and in the trenches with our teachers. The visits are not perceived as traps or stressful or as an anxious visit to teachers that perform their jobs at their ability and expected level on a daily basis. Do you have a plan or expectation in mind for your district leadership team to be physically present in our buildings?
Thank you for that question. I would say in my past and my current roles, being in buildings is essential. So I would say as a high school principal, and assistant principal, I was in classrooms every single day. I made that a priority for my leadership team. My assistant principals knew that. My goal was to be in every classroom every week at minimum. So honestly, it was a little bit selfish too, because that's where I get my energy from. Seeing what the kids are doing, seeing what's going on, seeing the interaction. I believe that the team rubric, as wonderful as it is, 4 times a year is not enough to know what's really going on. So ultimately, it also helped inform as a building administrator when it might have been the teacher was not having a great day, and that is not what I normally see. And it was always good to know that. I would say as a high school director, I also made it a priority to be in the classrooms and visiting the principals. So I think, again, I'm very focused on relationships. As a high school director, I was in every high school a minimum of once a month. Had long in-depth conversations, personal conversations with the principals. We did classroom visits and walkthrough. I absolutely don't think that visits should ever be gotchas. And again, if you're in and out of those buildings all the time, you know what's common and you know what's a nuance. In my current role, I would again emphasize as the chief of college career readiness, I also get in and out of classrooms almost on a weekly basis. The commissioner knows anytime she's going on a visit, the governor knows anytime he's going to CCTE rooms, please invite me, and if I can make it work, I absolutely will. That's when I get my best ideas. So essentially, ideas and statewide initiatives that have occurred wasn't by any stretch of the imagination anything I came up with. It was conversations about what was going on in classrooms, where are some gaps, where are some needs, how could we maybe fix those, do we have the money to make it happen, and then taking that back to superintendents and teachers and saying, do you think this would work? So I do agree, whoever gets this job, that it is paramount for them to have a plan to always be in the classrooms to really know what is going on.
Next question. Yes.
Hi, I'm Jody Mitchell. I'm from Clarksville High School, and I wanted to ask this question. As a special educator, I'm very concerned that our district underserves students with unique special needs, specifically students with autism and students with emotional disturbances. What plans do you have to address the needs of these services?
So I have to acknowledge Jody Mitchell is an outstanding special education teacher, as I'm sure many of you know, and her heart and soul is all about those kids. So I will be very honest and transparent. I've always had a heart for special education. That perspective deepened even more 3 years ago. So as the stepmother of a 9-year-old with severe needs, and she is autistic, she is in a life skills classroom. teachers definitely know what goes on with those kids. Parents know what goes on with those kids. As administrators, I think we always thought, oh, we know, we see it. Until you are living it, hour after hour, day after day, and you are entrenched in that experience, you don't know what it's really like. So again, my heart goes out to special education teachers. What I would say is a few things. This new funding formula that I referenced has 10 unique learning needs. Funding for every student will be easy to calculate. You will actually be able, parents, there's a calculator that will be online. You will see the funding that is generated for every student with special needs. And ultimately, as administrators, as people who oversee that money, we will be responsible to the public to say how we're spending that money. And are we providing the resources that they need? Are they actually, is the money being generated for those students with special needs being given back to those students with special needs? Is it a situation where they should be in an inclusion classroom, but it would require a one-on-one aide to go with them? Then we need to make sure that's happening. Ultimately, again, focused on every student deserves the best we have. And every student, when they leave high school, needs to have a plan. That doesn't mean general education students graduate with a plan. It means all of our students. So what does that look like? Are we having transition plans? Do we have opportunities for our students with special needs to have work-based learning? Are we teaching them employability skills? What are we doing to make sure that when they graduate, they also have a plan?
Next question.
Hi, Dr. Jean. It's so good to see you again, and so proud of what I was able to hear about you doing at the state level tonight in your interview. I wanted to address something that you said in your interview that I was so grateful to hear, and then ask you a question. So I just wanted to, for those of you who weren't here to hear the interview, as many people came in afterward, I appreciated what you had to say about being a principal at Clarksville High and having meetings with your classified staff. We often hear about, of course, staff meetings with teachers, but for you to say that you took the time to set up classified staff meetings, I have never heard of a principal doing that. And that shows me that you value all. And I think it's so important. We hear about teachers, and being a teacher previously in a different role now. Teachers are important, but everyone else in the building is important too. And that right there shows me that you value everyone. And we all have a role to play, and everyone's role is important, so thank you. My question for you, our school system, I feel like we get a lot of attention for elementary schools and high schools, but as a former parent and now grandparent of a middle school student in the school system, I feel that middle schools don't offer really anything special like high schools do or elementary schools do. And so I was excited to hear you say that middle schools, there's a trajectory, I think you said, about teaching careers or offering career knowledge opportunity to middle schools coming up, and also teaching skills to students like how to get along with others, how to talk to others, how to disagree with others. So my question for you is, what specifically do you think our middle schools could offer that would set them apart like we have our high schools and elementary schools?
Absolutely. So I would say middle school, and I taught middle school many years. It's often that lost space. So what we have done is we've created 3 courses that are, again, are electives, they're optional. Districts may choose to implement, they may not, that are all focused on that career readiness. There's a 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. Districts may choose to just choose one of those. So those course offerings, I would say, are one thing. We do have a legislative mandate that actually requires all middle school students to take an assessment. It may be youth science, it may be another vendor, but essentially something that shows what your interests are and where your skills are. But the grant that you're mentioning is going to be $500,000 for every single middle school. So how are we planning for that? So I would ask, what are we doing for academic advising? What are we doing to expose them to CTE courses? All of that is going to be available starting July. Sorry, I need a cough drop.
I totally feel the same.
But I would also say, I think it's going to be really important, not just for CTE, not just for career readiness, but also sometimes middle school gets a little bit left out when we talk about literacy, math, ACT. Forgetting that 6th, 7th, and 8th, we cannot accomplish all of those goals in high school unless we have those alignments, benchmarks, and we really need to be paying attention to that data as well.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Steffi Outlaw. I work at Northeast High School. I'm a history teacher. And I have a question about feedback. I have it on my phone, so I have to try to read it. Building level educators are evaluated. Administrators, they have their 360s. But level directors, consulting teachers, and academic coaches who directly impact the careers of educators don't receive feedback from those educators. What would you, as director, do, if anything, to address this?
I think that's really important. So ultimately, as you mentioned, currently those level directors receive feedback from principals, from assistant principals, but not educators. I do think that there should be an open opportunity, whether that's a 360 or some other type of survey that ultimately captures what that looks like, so everybody has an opportunity and a voice. As educators, you see what goes on, you hear what goes on. So I do think that that could be addressed through a survey of some sort.
Question right next.
Yes.
Hi, Dr. Fetters. I'm Melissa Lindsey. I teach English at Montgomery Central High School. So as an English teacher, I especially worry about some legislation that we have coming up. There have been several years where there's been proposed legislation with, at least with the Education Subcommittee, that is frankly frightening to educators. So I know that Cmcss leaders meet with our representatives, but we still face career-altering legislation like CRT, charter school legislation, book banning, and sometimes our representatives don't actually end up supporting us on those endeavors. So what do you think the role of the district and you personally would be for communicating with not just local leaders, but others, especially those in the Education Subcommittee?
Absolutely. So I would say the last 3 years has taught me so much more than I ever knew about what that looks like by working at the state level and actually working through some of that legislation. I think it's going to be very important for whoever is in this role to always stay abreast of potential bills before they become bills, of potential legislation. I know Elizabeth Vincent, I see her quite often, she does that, and she's that liaison for the district where she is bringing that information back. I think there needs to be robust conversations before something becomes law. So essentially, what are the things that are surfacing? What are potential talks of bills? What are some legislation that is coming forward? And I have learned they really, really do listen. So it needs to be flagged in communities, it needs to be shared with other leaders as far as, hey, have you been told about this? Especially if it impacts your work. So if it's something that specifically impacts English teachers, English teachers, have you heard about this? If you have feelings about this, just awareness. I don't think it is ever a leader's job to tell you how you should feel about anything, but it is probably to make people aware of what's coming or what could be coming forth. Because there is so much happening every single year. I do think it's important to stay informed and provide that feedback because they truly do listen. I can say, just the last week of legislation alone, a bill had been passed. Our legislative affairs team flagged, they're like, hey, there may be an amendment coming forth because you had a meeting with CTE directors and they flagged this as an issue. Here's an amendment. Did you know about this amendment? That was based on one meeting and those directors providing direct feedback, and an amendment was posed.
Good evening, Dr. Luna-Vedder. I am Denise Smith-Martinez, and I teach English at Kenwood Middle School. The Department of Education compiled data which includes that only 13% of educators in Tennessee are educators of color, and only 20% of our administrators are of color. We know of the Grow Your Own program, but how do you envision CMCSS retaining the quality and qualified educators and administrators of color? And how should CMCSS connect and act on this inequity across this domain?
Absolutely, and I think that is striking evidence that we have had conversations about. I think that's twofold. You talk about the recruiting, you talk about the retaining. Recruiting, I would say, we would continue to do things like go to colleges with a diverse population. I would also say we need to be looking right here in our county. So we have pipelines and we have potentials for our students. As we talk about, obviously our students are the demographic is representative of what our community looks like. Are we having conversations about potentially teaching? Are we exposing students and having those conversations about the opportunities, whether or not you have teaching as a profession in your high school? Or again, there's going to be opportunities for coursework at the college level that they can earn post-secondary for introduction to teaching, that we make sure that we are having very targeted conversations. I think we also talk with our counselors about what that looks like. They know our students, they work with them on a daily basis. I think that we also just need to elevate that conversation of what teaching looks like and make it an attractive profession. Going back to that retention, I cannot presume to know what it is that drives all of our teachers. I think having targeted conversations, that survey data about what is it that makes you stay and why are you leaving and what can we do to solve that?
Hello, hey everybody. I'm Dr. Young. I'm a school psychologist serving Hazelwood and Carmel Elementary School. My question is kind of like hers, but she talked about it as a whole. So I'm talking about in this district. You stated that a shift in mindset has to be a growth in mindset. I love how you said don't be afraid to look at data because it can tell you a lot. As you have also talked about being a team and working in unison. With only 16% of minorities employed in this district, how will you advocate for more diverse employees in school leadership positions, such as coordinators, directors, and principals? What unique ideas would you use to recruit or promote the need for diversity in leadership in the school district, as you have talked about the importance of culture or school culture?
Thank you for that question. I would say, going back again, wondering is, are we tying into all the opportunities that currently exist? Are we capitalizing on things at the state level, like the Diverse Leaders Network? Are we filling all of our spaces and all of those opportunities? But again, I would say that backwards design, we cannot necessarily always have the leaders unless sometimes we are growing those leaders. So what opportunities are we creating at other levels that actually lead to those positions? We cannot just rely on diversity coming at that top level if we are not also feeding the levels as educators, as assistant principals, as principals. I think we need to be very intentional when we are having those professional developments and having those conversations. And also being very strategic with conversations as administrators about recognizing those traits that we see in our current teachers. Are we having those conversations and saying, I think you would be an outstanding administrator? Have you ever thought about a level director position? What supports can we provide there? I think it's going to be essential to make sure it's a targeted conversation.
Good evening, I'm Constance Brown, and I'm a success coach at Early Technical College at TCAP. In a recent collaborative conferencing survey, 67% of teachers in this district said they have considered alternate employment this year. As a director, what will you personally do to improve teacher morale?
And that data is alarming, and I think it's a reality. I think it's several layers to that conversation. I think when you talk about 2/3 of your teachers saying, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, we have to find out the why. I would again emphasize things like discipline. Are we being consistent in our discipline? What does our student code of conduct look like? Are we implementing that with fidelity? Does it make sense? Are we doing those proactive measures as far as the restorative practices, the resilience-based communities, things that make sense and help our kids? I would also say, what are we doing to feed the souls of our teachers? So what is it that they need? Again, money would be great, but I promise you, of those 67%, if you said we're gonna add $10,000, I don't know that that would change that drastically of what that looks like, because it's not about money. Again, as I mentioned in my interview, I don't think any of us went into education saying, I am going to be rich and so I am going to be a teacher. It's not why we did it. And so what I would say to that is we have to find out the why, and then we have to do something about it. So often what we do is we have teacher engagement groups, we put out surveys, and we have all the data, and they tell us all the things, and it's like, oh, that's great, that's nice. We might need to work on that. What are the next steps? So what did that look like, and then what are we going to do differently? So what I would say, and again, not that this would solve all the world's problems, but when I was a building principal, we would do every year, it was the last thing we did at the end of the school year, the teachers knew they had an opportunity, the SWOT analysis. So what did we do really well? What are our weaknesses? What are our opportunities? What are our threats? They came up with ideas like, we need new meeting lines down this hallway. Yes, we do. Things that didn't even really think about, but it mattered to them. We need new paint. Mr. Rick, let's sit down and come up with a 12-month plan of how we're gonna make the entire building in increments. We need, seems silly and little things, but I swear the Sonic drink order was the biggest thing ever. Sent out an email and saying, we're gonna do a Sonic run, it's 99 cents for a Sonic, we're gonna do a Sonic run, put in your order on this spreadsheet. And I've never seen such concoctions, by the way, in my life. I'm like, what is this drink? Anyhow, but they told me what they wanted. Put ice cream on a cart and walk it down the hallway. Just little things to brighten the day. I would also say it comes from building the culture in buildings. So when we look at that data, is it certain buildings? And within that building, what is it within that building? Is it, and where, again, are we doing it really well? How can we replicate that? So where have we seen culture and pride advancing? And then how can we make that more of a district approach and replicate what's going on?
Welcome back. I'm Deborah Chancellor, I'm a first grade MCO. Montgomery County Schools used to be ranked #1 and #2 in the state of Tennessee. And considering that all the school districts in Tennessee have been dealing with COVID, your position at the Department of Education has given you, or is giving you, unique access to what's going on across the whole state. So what do you think explains why we are dropping in our ranking across the state?
That's a great question. And I would say, without getting too deeply into it, you are exactly right. So obviously the pandemic, we know statewide, pandemic hit scores. It was to be expected. But we also know that pandemic hit scores worse in some areas than others. And there are some districts that did not experience significant losses. Some even experienced gains. Some still experienced growth. What I would say is that, I don't think anyone can just say blanket and propose to have all the solutions. What I would say is it does need to be an in-depth conversation. Where did we see drops? Where did we see gains? What can we learn from those that did well? And what did they do differently? I have no problem, as in any role I've ever had, whether it was a high school principal and Shannon Dowdy's scores, were something happened and I'm like, all right, what did you do here? I had no problem reaching out and saying, what did you do, and help me do the same thing. As a state, did the same thing, reached out to Indiana. Hey, Indiana, hey, I see you're doing this in CTE, tell me what you're doing. I think we need to make that a conversation. So again, there is nothing wrong with saying someone else is doing something maybe a little better than we are. Great, let's find out what they're doing. It doesn't mean we have to copy everything, but it also can elevate what is going on and what's going well. It might be, again, in pockets already, learning from one another, or it might be reaching out, and that's okay too.
Hi, Dr. Vedder, Chris, Central Office. So just curious, how would you characterize your leadership style, and how do you get people to follow, and how do you inspire those followers?
That's a great question, and probably, to be quite frank, could be answered by those in the room much better than me. What I would say though about my leadership style, I would say I have a solid work ethic. I was in that building probably more hours than I should have been. I would also say that I'm very much a servant leadership. Like, my style is, I don't like being the front and center. I don't like things being about me. I like it to be about the kids, and I like to be, I know my job is to serve those who serve our kids. So how can I do that? I'm also huge on culture, pride, morale. I'll tell a quick story. When we were first at Clarksville High School, and I was there with Dr. Hasefold, and we were watching the kids at graduation, and Phyllis is a proud CHS graduate, and the kids were not singing the alma mater at graduation, and we're like, I don't think these kids know it. Phyllis came to central office, and I was like, by gosh, that is not gonna happen again next year. We are gonna, they are gonna be singing that alma mater. So they did. Every Friday, and it was very reluctantly at first, and it was what is this? We're singing the alma mater. We sang it at pep rallies. We sang it it became a thing. I think it was 2012, 2013, anyhow, girls won state soccer. I will never forget. They came running over to the crowd, put all their arms around each other, and they all started singing the alma mater, and I have never been so proud in my life. And it seems so small, but those things are what matters. And that's what makes people feel part of something bigger than they are. It makes people feel part of the family, and that goes for the students and the teachers and the parents. Because I promise you, every time that happens, and still, my daughter will graduate, and she's been a member of the dance team, and I go on Friday night, and the football team wins, and they all go running over, and they sing the alma mater, and that's community. And so I think Those are the things that really, really matter to me.
Hi, Dr. Luna. You know who I am. I'm Melissa Johnson. I'm the academic coach at Clarksville High School and the RTI coach for the district. And I just want to say, as a fellow spouse of a former service member, I know that I experienced many new ideas and educational focuses as I moved across the world, the best of which I always try to bring with me to each new position. What is one thing you've experienced or learned from your time at the state that you're excited to bring back to CMCSS?
That's a great question. For me, I think not just one thing, because I've continued to be pretty invested in this community, and as things come up at the state level, I tag the appropriate person and say, hey, did you know about this grant? Make sure you apply. So this district has done a great job making sure, I think they're connected. But for me, it's more about that continuum and connecting the dots. So making sure that our K-12 is connected back up through the state. Like, before I went to the Department of Education, it was always like, those people at the state. You know, it was that conversation. I now also understand that connection and how that can be capitalized on. That's also resources. That's people, that's connections, and ultimately, I don't know and I'm only speaking personally, in any of my roles, that I capitalized on that nearly enough, or that I pushed on who I needed to, like, if I wasn't getting answers nearly enough. I think we need to understand in that continuum how we are connected to make sure that our voices are being heard. We meet, there's 147 districts, and so we meet with superintendent engagement groups. So like I've got one, there's 3 big buckets at the state level: academics, student readiness, and educators. I oversee student readiness. So I have a whole group of superintendents who I meet with monthly, who give me feedback, who give me ideas. We've got these regional study councils where superintendents are meeting and they're having conversations. We need to make sure, and I'm not saying we're not, but we need to make sure that we are involved in those conversations. When we think about, of those 147, where we are, as far as sheer size, we should be part of a lot of really important conversations occurring at the state level.
Dr. Luna. I have 2 questions. Well, it's a 2-part question. One is, do you support pre-K? And what would your plan be to implement universal pre-K here in Clarksville-Montgomery County? And how would you address the capacity issues that we have to add more classrooms? Great questions.
Number 1, I don't think you can be an educator and say, I am opposed to pre-K. We know those early years are critical to learning. Balance that with, we also know it costs money. So what I would say, I don't oversee pre-K programs in my current role, so I'm not as familiar with what that looks like. What I would say is it's an important piece of the puzzle. I think it needs to be looked at in that continuum and then balanced with budget. What are our priorities? Does it make sense to add pre-K? Does it make sense to have it expanded? What does that look like in a sustainable fashion? Can it be that we do it incrementally? You know, how are we going to make that happen, but also making sure that it's not sacrificing anything that we need to make sure that we are also prioritizing?
If no one else has a question, I'll go twice. So we're having having, as you know, a teacher shortage. We're having a shortage in so many different areas in our county and I suppose across the state and country. But we are losing a lot of teachers in this county to counties that are adjoining. I've, in just the past couple of months, had colleagues who were good teachers, professionals, who are leaving to go to Cheatham County, Robertson County, to Dixon. And so some teachers leave because the workload in this district is so much greater. And we've been told that the salary difference compensates us for this work. But if teachers are leaving because they feel that they have such a burden that they don't see as beneficial to what's happening in their classrooms, can we truly afford to continue with book studies and additional meetings and those sorts of things?
So first, I just want to say, I was not aware of that, and that took me aback a little bit, to be quite honest with you, because during my time in this county, that's not typical, or that was not typical. So I would be very interested to see what that data looks like. I would say though, when you're talking about, again, the drive, I have never met a teacher yet that I don't think is willing to work really hard. However, I would also say they need to see what they're working really hard for and get the rewards on the back end. So essentially, what is going on, or what are those conversations, and what is it that is the extra that we can maybe look at making either more efficient or taking off the plates? So if it's critical and crucial and aligned, okay, but where do we look? And if we're going to add things, where are we going to remove things or align things? I think has to be a crucial conversation. I would also say, again, going back, I would really be interested to dig into that data and see, is that a district problem? Is it a building problem? If it's a building problem, is it in a certain time period? Like, what are the, what is going on at the root cause? I guess I would have to really dig in to see what was going on.
Good evening again. This question comes from experiences of other educators and myself who are of Asian, African American, and or Latina descent. And as a former student of Cmcss when there were only 4 high schools, how do we solve the issue of groups of students who may be over or underrepresented in advanced course enrollment or gifted and talented programs? And what solutions do you offer to this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, it goes back to, it's a few things. First, I would say, right before the pandemic hit, or in the time leading up to the pandemic, we were actually at the state level doing a pilot where we were generating all the data that fed into, say, this student, looking only at their data, and again, that's only quantitative, not qualitative. Looks like they'd be a really good advanced placement or dual enrollment student, and they've never taken that opportunity. We generated letters, sent them out to all the schools, and said, have your counselors or administrators talk to these kids. Why are they not? Is it because they don't know about the opportunity? They don't think they should do those courses? Like, get the whys behind it. And so we actually were doing that, and we were seeing numbers increase. I think that needs to be continued. What is that data pull, and why is that? I would also say increasing opportunities to make sure there's different options. So AP courses may not be for everyone, and that's okay, but are we providing dual enrollment opportunities? We can have dual enrollment in just about anything. So you can have, what are those opportunities to earn post-secondary credits in students' interests? But again, I think it comes down to that academic advising piece and really having targeted conversations, which again goes to making sure that we have enough school counselors and/or coupling that with those that are specifically only talking to kids about academic and career advising.
Hi. My question's a short question. It's about parental engagement. Parental engagement tends to wane in the middle and the high school level. And so what would your plans be to get parents more engaged? Because engaged parents tend to lessen discipline problems and support teachers.
Absolutely, and you are absolutely correct. What I have found to be true is being very strategic, first of all, of when you have your parent engagement and making sure that it is potentially coupled with something else to draw parents in. I would also say, quite frankly, through conversations with parents, school can be a scary place for some parents. Sometimes they did not have a very good school experience themselves, and/or they've never heard anything good about their child when they go to school. So what are we doing to make sure that we are having some proactive conversations with parents, that sometimes they hear things from the administrators, from teachers when things are going really well. I would also say though, making sure, so let's say we were going to have a parent night about, let's say like ACT boot camp or something like that, making sure your child is ready. Is there anything else coming up that's an activity that it could be coupled with? So as long as I'm going to that school anyhow about this activity, I can also do this. I think also seizing opportunities such as those open houses and the parent-teacher conference nights. Why not hold sessions in the cafeteria? You know, as long as you're coming or hopefully coming, we're also going to have this session about this. Can we couple it with, NCAA eligibility night? You know, what are the things that are going to draw some of the parents in?
Hello, I'm Ricky Douglas and biology teacher at Clarksville High School. Coming off of a year where half of our students were virtual, student accountability and student behavior issues have really come to the forefront this year. Behavior issues have escalated and teachers are being asked to create multiple documentations and parent contacts before behavior referral can be made. These are putting additional burdens on teachers, and it even leads to a higher level of some of these bad behaviors. As a director, how would you support improving student behaviors and accountability?
Yeah, so I think one would be digging in again to what does the student discipline policy look like in that code of conduct, and has anything changed with that in recent years? And is there anything that has then had a result? We know pandemic, obviously, it is playing into some of that. I would also say, as we are talking about this influx of ESSER and GEAR and federal dollars, are we putting things at the school level to help those supports? Where are we adding supports and resources? And could we potentially be putting them at the schools where they are making an impact and a difference? So I think there's got to be a multi-layer, I guess, examination of what that looks like. I would say though that teachers can only do so much. And so I think that is recognized and that's acknowledged. And so, again, I think putting additional resources at the school level needs to be something that needs to be looked at.
Any other questions? Well, if there aren't any other questions, Dr. Luna-Vedder, if you would like to share just a few words as you wrap up.
First, I would just like to say thank you for everybody who came out tonight. I would especially like to thank the school board members for being given this opportunity. Again, I know a lot of people applied for this job, and this is a really, really important job. And I ultimately just want someone in this position that's best for this district. If that's not me, that is really okay. I just care deeply about this district, and whatever role I happen to be in, I will always be be a huge supporter of CMCSS. So I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity.